Hey, good afternoon. We're back and I need to adjust my audio. Give me a second. I think that's okay. Hopefully that's coming through loud enough. Let me adjust this maybe. It's a little closer. Well, welcome back to another stream, folks. If you remember last week, let me just change the view here quickly. If you remember last week, we were working on VPC endpoints and we built this, right? So we built a VPC, okay? And then within that VPC, we deployed a gateway interface. And if you remember, the gateway interface is one of the two options that we have available for VPC endpoints. We've got gateways and interface endpoints. The gateway endpoint is free of charge and it simply adds an entry to our route tables. So this is what we did last week. We created this gateway endpoint and then we were able to basically say traffic on, let's say, an EC2 based application can now flow through our route table to get to the S3 service in this account in what we set up. We talked about the fact that you can create multiple layers of protection. You can put an endpoint policy on your gateway endpoint, and you can put a bucket policy on your S3 bucket. And we did the bucket policy last week as a way to demonstrate that we were in fact going from our EC2 instance through the gateway interface to the S3 bucket, because we created a bucket policy here that said, I can't remember exactly what we did. We had something like you could do gets and puts, but you could only do gets and puts if you were coming through, this endpoint, right? The gateway endpoint. So that was just to demonstrate how that would work. And then from my laptop, we were able to demonstrate that coming over the internet, we couldn't run those gets and puts anymore. We get an access denied because this bucket policy said that you could only run get and put actions from the gateway VPC, the gateway endpoint within our VPC. So that's what we covered last week. And then this week, what I thought we would do is change gears here a little bit and demonstrate how we could do this with interface endpoints now. So that's the goal for today. And that would look very similar to this. I got a couple extra diagrams here. Hold on a second. So if we think about sort of using the same examples, what I was thinking is a VPC. And within this VPC, we'll set up our EC2 instance. And then we'll deploy, how could I draw? Let's do it like this. Just move this over here a bit, right? So we'll deploy an interface endpoint, and we'll use that interface endpoint to communicate with some services. Now we'll have, let me do it like this, right? We have that, and then we have, we'll just call it, we'll call it the, using the wrong thing, the gateway endpoint is here. So what we'll do is we'll say, we'll leave our S3 bucket set up, okay? And that means that our EC2 application could do this through the gateway endpoint, right? And then I thought what we could do today is, quite often on the stream, we use the systems manager solution, particularly the session manager piece of it. So what I thought we would do is, session manager is another good example of a service that exists outside of the VPC. So what we'll do here is we'll set up an interface endpoint to allow that communication now, okay? Because right now what's happening is we're actually doing something like this. If you think about this guy, it's connected to the outside world through an internet gateway, right? And there's our internet. So what's actually happening right now, let's assume that this interface endpoint isn't here and we're talking to SSM. The traffic is actually going like that, right? And what we'll do is by putting the interface endpoint there, we can keep that traffic, like we talked about last week, we can keep that traffic on the AWS network rather than it going out over the public internet. Okay, so that is what we'll do. Hey, Kevin, welcome back. I have somehow messed up my little view here. I'm using a different application, and I have messed up the view so I can't see who's in the stream anymore. And I have no clue what I did, but I can see comments, so we know that is working. All right, so welcome back. If we flip over to Firefox, I reran the pipeline that we ran last week. Kevin, good question. Yes, there are a couple things to think about with an interface endpoint. If I flip back here, thank you for making me think about this. I'll use a different color. Because an interface endpoint is essentially deploying an elastic network interface, an ENI in your VPC, then we have a security group here that we have to think about, including the security group. Sorry, my drawings are getting a little cramped, but we've got the security group there around our EC2. And just like last week, if I add another color to this, I'm really running out of space. We do still have endpoint policies that are applicable to the interface endpoint. So if I was to continue to draw this out, I'm really running out of space. You can see where we could have those resource policies associated with this. And remember, the concept here is sort of a key thing in AWS and securing your environments is this approach of layers of security that we talked about last week as well. So now we've got things like policy documents, security groups involved, and that would give us the ability to add those additional layers of protection, make something or somebody jump through multiple layers before they can perform a particular action in our environment. Okay, good question. All right, so that's what we're going to try to build. We've got the S3 piece all set up already. So let's see. I think SSM is just a decent way to do this, an easy way to demonstrate it. Okay, so this is what we've built. And if you remember last week, here are, I don't know why I ended up naming them like this, but we set up our IAM policies. We'll review these as we go through because we might have to make some changes. Here's our VPC. Here's our security groups that we set up. I can't remember what we set up in the security groups, so we'll review that. And then I did deploy the gateway VPC again for the S3 service. So that means if we go to the VPC service now, we shall see here's our VPC. And then if we go down to endpoints, we have a single gateway endpoint. This is the S3 service that we set up last week. Okay, so that's that piece. Let's have a look. Do I have the project open? I do, but let me just resize this window a bit. Okay, so if we go to PyCharm, here's our project, and we don't need to worry about test images. Here are the security groups. So last week we set up a security group for the interface endpoint, and remember that the security groups for your interface endpoints, they only require a single port. They need to allow inbound traffic on 443. And last week we essentially set this up to allow anything within the VPC. That's our VPC CIDR block range there. So anything within the VPC can communicate, basically is allowed, inbound traffic is allowed from the VPC as a source to the interface endpoint and then whatever's behind that, okay? So that's what we got set up there. What was in IAM? Oh, remember we created the role that we always use. And this is just the EC2 instance role that allows us, in our example last week, to run S3 operations, gets and puts against our bucket. But it also added here the SSM Managed Instance Core, which allows us to access the SSM service. So one of the things that we will need sooner rather than later is an EC2 instance, and that I don't think I set up before. Yeah, it's not running. Okay, so we don't have anything. So I know normally we do this in CloudFormation, but to stay sort of on the VPC endpoint thing, let's just do this. We'll say Twitch EC2 instance. We'll just create this manually. We'll leave it as 2023. We'll go to ARM processors, so we could use Graviton chips. We'll use a T4G small. We're not going to use a key pair because we'll access it through SSM. And we should have an existing security group. So this is our EC2 security group. Okay, so we'll use that. GP3 is fine. And remember, we do this all the time as well. We check our instance profile, and we use, in this case, we're using the source IEM one. This is what's going to give us those permissions that we need. And the other thing that we do, and again, this is more just habit forming, is we want to make sure that metadata is using version 2. Right? Version 1 versus version 2. Version 2 is more secure. So we'll just add that to make sure. Okay, and we'll launch that. And that will give us our instance that we can use for testing in a minute. Okay. So if I look at our diagram again here, I already forget what we have to deal with. So let's go back over here. If we think about sort of a list of work items, we need an SG for our interface endpoint. We need the interface endpoint, and we're going to create one for SSM. And then we need to figure out a way to test this. Okay. And the first thing we've done already, because we've got our security group for our interface endpoint already. That was easy because we did that last week. So why don't we create interface endpoints for the SSM service, and we'll go from there. And that is, what I'll do is we'll go here first. If you remember this page, let me share this. I think I shared it last week, but let me share this in the chat as well. Okay. So that's the link to this page. And this page will show you all of the services that use or can use the interface endpoints. I'm on the wrong page. There we go. This is the right page. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to find SSM. It's alphabetical, so I could scroll, couldn't I? There's Systems Manager. Here's the thing, and I think, again, we mentioned this last week. Some of these services, Systems Manager is a great example, may require the use of multiple endpoints. So you can see with Systems Manager, we have EC2, messages, SSM, SSM contacts, SSM incidents, and SSM messages. And the other thing to remember with these is interface endpoints are highly available, fully managed in the availability zone where we deploy them. In our situation, if I was to just draw this in another quick diagram, what we've created is a VPC that spans two AZs, right? AZ1 and AZ2. So this is our first subnet, and this is our second subnet. And what we're going to do is we're going to deploy an interface endpoint in each of these subnets. One of the things that you need to take into consideration here is remember that interface endpoints are not free of charge like gateway endpoints. So you are going to incur fees for this. You're going to incur a fee for the number of hours that interface endpoint is available. You're also going to incur fees for the data that's flowing through the interface endpoints. It's not an astronomical cost, but it is something that you need to take into consideration from the very beginning. And what I would suggest is, let me find this for everybody. Calculator. Is the calculator website, and it is here. And I'll do the same thing. I'll just share this So you've got it for a reference. Okay. Oh, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I got it switched over now. So here's the calculator page. And it's really simple to use. All you have to do is say create an estimate, decide on the region. So we're using the Canadian region. And then you just search for the service. Now, in this case, interface endpoints are part of the VPC service. So we can say configure. And you'll notice we got a lot of things to take into consideration here. So I'm just going to turn on interface endpoints are powered by what they call private link. So we'll turn that on and we'll turn VPN connections off. All I want to do is estimate this, and we could give it a description. So we'll just say interface endpoints, and then we need to decide on the number of endpoints per region. And I'll just make a number up. Doesn't really matter for today. So let's say we have 4 interface endpoints that we're going to deploy in a region. So in our case, CA Central 1. And then what are the number of availability zones an interface endpoint is deployed in? We're going to say 2. Okay. And then we have to say how much traffic is processed by all of the VPC interface endpoints in this account. And I don't know, I'll just make a number up. Let's say 25 gigs per month. And then down at the bottom, it will give us our price. So you can see we've got 4 VPC endpoints by 2 ENIs per VPC endpoint. So that's going to cost us $64 a month. And then you pay for the data processing on top of that. So there's our additional cost. The way that we approach this now with customers is once we have the sort of reference architecture, what it is we're going to build, we say, okay, these are all the endpoints that we're going to need, and we build those right into the price from the beginning, okay? And then that way, we can explain those additional networking costs, and, customer can sort of decide whether or not they think it's appropriate for what they're doing, but we're going to build them in from scratch or from the beginning of any solution that we build for a customer now, because from our perspective, keeping that traffic on the AWS network gives us better latency because it's using the AWS network. It's not bouncing out over the internet, but it also can help us improve the security by now we're on a trusted network, right? We're using the AWS network. So that's the calculator page, and that's how you could sort that out. The one other thing that I'll just show, if we flip back here, this is our security group, right? So we're going to have a single security group that we use for all of the interface endpoints that we're going to build here. And then that way, it's easy to manage. You could create individual ones for, you might want to say, allow only the instances in the private subnet to access a particular interface endpoint, or allow all of the resources within a VPC to access this endpoint. So that's going to be up to you to decide how you want to tackle it. But for what we're going to do today, we're just going to create a single security group. So let's go back here, here. And what we need to do is look at the SSM piece. What we should actually do is just test this. So here's our EC2 instance. And we'll say connect, session manager, and right, we're on the machine, and we can run a sudo command. It works. Okay. So we're using SSM to connect to this machine. However, at this point, that connection is going over the public internet because SSM is outside of the VPC and our EC2 instance is inside the VPC. So again, looking at this diagram, where's my highlighter? That traffic is going like this, right? Actually, let's draw it like this. Right, it's doing that. Okay. So what we want to do is configure it so it does that. So let's do that. All right. Oh, one other thing I should show you here. Because we're dealing with a service that has multiple endpoints, right? Systems manager. In what we're doing today, just getting the session manager piece to deploy, we don't need everything. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Systems Manager, and I think we can find it here. Yeah, okay, so Right? This is just talking again about allowing outbound internet access to your managed instance. In this case, they also must also allow HTTP outbound traffic to the following endpoints. We don't have to worry about outbound traffic. We're allowing all outbound traffic. Okay. Now, let's have a look at this. This is important. VPC endpoints don't support cross-region requests, so we're going to have the appropriate VPC endpoints in the appropriate regions. Okay. We can, let's see here, we can access VPC interface endpoints through intra and inter-region VPC peering connections, so that's great, but we're not going to worry about that today. The security group attached to your endpoint must allow connections on 443, which we've talked about. We need to have, if we use custom DNS, which we don't, then we need those forwarders. That's fine. The VPC endpoint policy must allow access to at least the following S3 buckets. Yeah, so this is for some of the features that you can enable in the Systems Manager solution. We're not going to do that today, but we'll set it up so it follows this. Okay, so let's see here. If you don't allow your instances to access the internet, create a VPC endpoint for CloudWatch logs to use features. So one of the things about Systems Manager is when you're running Systems Manager commands, you can log the command output to either S3 or CloudWatch logs. So what we're saying here is if you don't have that connectivity and you want to use that feature of Systems Manager logging to CloudWatch logs, you need to have a VPC endpoint that points to CloudWatch logs as well, because if you don't, then you won't be able to communicate with the log service, right? Because it's outside of your VPC and you have no internet connectivity on your VPC anymore. And this is the piece here, right? So you can see this is the section that's telling us about the various endpoints for Systems Manager. And we have, I thought here, yeah, here we go. The first three endpoints are required for Systems Manager to work in a VPC. The fourth is required only if we're using Session Manager capabilities. So we need to set up all of these? I didn't think we had to. Yeah, I think for today we'll set them up. Okay, so we're going to have 4 endpoints with 2 Elastic Network interfaces each. So we'll set these 3 up. And then follow the steps to create a gateway endpoint to create the following gateway endpoint for S3, which we actually already did. We did that last week. So we're good there. All right. And then endpoint policies. We'll have a look at an endpoint policy like we did last week. We'll check that sort of near the end of the broadcast. If we have time, we'll come back and we'll have a look at it and see how it's set up. So these are the endpoints that we need. So let's jump back over. I'm gonna cut and paste this into a different window like I did last week. I'll just keep that over here on the side so I don't have to keep flipping back and forth. Let me just rearrange some of these windows. Make myself a little more space. All right, perfect. That should do the trick. And then if we go here. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll create a new file here, and I'll just call this interface.yaml. And we'll borrow from here again. So we'll just grab all of this. Okay, so now we're going to say interface endpoints, and then we'll say resources, and we're going to need a bunch of these interfaces, right? And this is where my cheat sheet will come in handy. Give me a second to find this again. When I moved windows, I lost where those required pieces are. Okay, there we go. So what we'll do is we'll just do SSM 0, and I need to find. Let me find this again, and I'll share what I'm looking at. CloudFormation interface endpoint. I just need to know all the properties that we have to set up here. Actually, no, it should be identical to what we did last week with a few basic changes. So here, I'll show you. Right, so if you remember, this is what we looked at last week. We're not going to worry about a policy document right away. Private DNS enabled. In this case, we will want to turn this on if I recall. Do we want to use a private hosted zone with specified? Actually, no, we don't need that. I think we can get away with, to use a private host zone, you must also have the attributes set. I don't think we need that. I can't remember now. We'll leave it off for the time being. We don't have to worry about route tables because those are for gateway endpoints only. We do have to add security groups, our service, and in this case, we will need to have the subnet IDs. So similar to what we did last week with just slight differences. So I think what we'll do is let's just grab this piece and we can just modify this where we need to. Okay, so the first thing is this needs to be changed to security group IDs, and we'll use our placeholder for the time being. We'll come back to that. Okay. The service name in this case will be, I changed my window again, just SSM. And up here, we'll change this, the interface endpoint type, or sorry, the VPC endpoint type. We're going to change the default to interface. So that'll pull this in, and then we can grab the VPC CIDR that we need. Actually, we can just take this, put it here, and change this, right? So this will be SG stack, and in our SGs, we just called it this, VPC Interface Endpoint ID. So we can dump that here. And then let's, okay, that's fine there, I guess. SG stack. Okay, so that's that. And then we'll just copy this, and we need to create an endpoint for EC2 messages. The rest of it all stays the same. We're just changing the endpoint, the service name, right? So we need SSM, EC2 messages, EC2, and then what did it say? The first 4 we needed. So this will be 3, and it will be SSM messages. Okay, so those are all of our endpoints. And then we can go here. Add this to that. And I can't remember now why I set this up, source and destination. I don't think we're using the destination at all. So let's just clean these out of here. I'm going to leave this file because it's got some configs. I can't remember why I created that in the first place. So we'll leave it just in case. I don't want to delete it and then need it for the stream. So we'll go here and we'll copy this. And this will be interface endpoints. That's kind of redundant, but it's the naming standard I use. That's weird. That's good. That's good. Interface, and then we do have some parameters to override. So there's our VPC stack already, and we need SG stack equals SG stack, and we do need to add that here too. Right, and then we just need this, the stack name, which is where? Oh, right there, looking right at it. That becomes our stack name. All right. so let's push that, and then what do I need to do? I think I have our pipeline opened here already. Yeah, here's our pipeline. And we'll give that a minute. Did I do the thing I always do when I cut and paste those and I didn't change the stack name? Oh no, I did. Yeah, because that was the weirdly named stack. Okay, so we're good. Right there it is there. So that means we should be able to go back here, go to CloudFront, and oh yeah, it might deploy some other stacks because I didn't put in the S3 bucket, which, yeah, we should actually deploy that just so we could test everything again. And then this is our interface endpoint. So if we go and look in our change set, there are 4 endpoints for SSM. I feel like I'm missing something here. I feel like we skipped over something. Let's go back. Oh yeah, look what I did. I took out the route tables because we don't need them, but I didn't put in the subnet IDs. We need to say where these are being deployed. So that's not going to help us very much. So let's do this. We'll say subnet, I think it's just IDs, yeah. And then we can do this. Actually, let's copy this one. And I don't remember what we called those outputs. So if we go to VPC, oh, it's just dash private subnet. Okay, so let's grab that. Okay, we'll say 0, because we want to put these, remember, in both our private subnets. And then we'll just copy this to each of these. Right? That's better. Otherwise, it's not going to work. That's more complete now. Just give this a second to run again. Oh, sorry. I'm missing your, I don't know, I missed your comments there, Kevin. Let's see. Tough question. Do you copy paste errors technically count as a typo? Technically, I think they do, don't they? It's a copy and pasted typo. Still a typo. The tough questions. All right, so there, that's deployed. We should have another change set, right? It'll look exactly the same, but hopefully we got everything in here that we need. And we might as well, this S3 bucket should work no problem. So let's just deploy that. I don't know if we'll really use it today, but we'll set it up. You know something that we don't have in this demo that maybe we should? Okay, there, that's getting created. While we're waiting for that, I'm thinking what we could do, and it's not really necessary for what it is we're trying to accomplish today, but it's something that we would say you should always have. So the VPC supports a service called flow logs. So what I think we'll do is we will set up flow logs, and that way we'll see network traffic at least like not deep packet inspection or anything like that, but we'll at least see the traffic flowing from our EC2 instance somewhere else. So why don't we set up flow logs? It should be there on all your VPCs anyways. And I think I have a template we can use for it, so we should be able to deploy it pretty quickly. Okay, so that's that. If we go to our VPC now, and we go endpoints, there we go. So now we've got the gateway endpoint for S3 and the 4 interface endpoints for our SSM service. Okay. Before we go any further, let's grab, let me just copy this and I'll find the template that I want and I'll copy it over. Just give me a second. Is this the best place to find it? It isn't. Just bear with me a sec. So you can have a look. I was on the wrong screen. You can, this is the screen I should have had up. There are the 4 interface endpoints, and that's our gateway endpoint from last week. So just give me 1 second to get logged into this other server, and we'll grab what we need off of this other server, just so we don't have to create it all from scratch. Okay. So let's go to PyCharm and we'll close all this down. Right. And what we need is within our networking modules section, we're just going to create flowlogs.yaml. And as I mentioned already, I'm going to borrow from our existing template, and we'll just slice this up a bit. This is like got everything in one template, so we're gonna break this up like we've done with our other templates. So the first thing I want to do is get our standard description that we use. Do that here. So we'll create flow log resources. And the first thing you're going to notice is the first 2 things here are actually IAM. These are the permissions. So here's another example, right? You've got one service talking to another. And remember that IAM by default denies all actions. So what we're going to do with this policy is we're going to say, allow the VPC flow log service to talk to the CloudWatch log service. So I'm going to just cut this here. And we're going to put that in our IAM document instead. And we'll just add it to the bottom. Now the one thing is we're going to need this flow log role information to add into our other template. So we're going to go like this. We'll say flow log role name. We'll grab this. And we'll just do this again. So we'll just say flow log, just to follow our standard there, flow log role name. Okay. So that's all we need there. And then on the flow log side, now this has KMS. So a couple things. I don't think we'll put KMS in here today because KMS stack will take a little while to deploy. CloudWatch logs, we'll double check this in the documentation. CloudWatch logs by default is encrypted. It's encrypted using an AWS managed key. If you set up your own KMS key, that's an example of a customer managed key, a CMK. Generally, I would say you want to create your own CMKs. They give you more control. You can set up auto rotation, things like that. But just to speed things along today, we will get rid of this and we'll just use the built-in key. Okay. And while I'm thinking of it, let me pull up this doc first and just show you this. so let me go here, right? So here's data protection in CloudWatch. Yeah, CloudWatch logs protects data at rest using encryption. All log groups are encrypted by default, and it uses the CloudWatch service manages the server-side encryption keys. And then, as I mentioned, if you want to manage those keys, which is best practice, you're going to have to create your own customer managed key. So I'll share this so you've got it for reference as well. Sorry, Kevin, I keep missing your comments because I don't know why the little comment window isn't scrolling to the bottom. Yeah, so it does count as double because you had a typo over here and then you copied and pasted the typo. So that's the equivalent of 2 typos. All right. Okay, so that's that piece. And we've got this set up, and then see right here, this is where we need to do that reference. So we're going to do this. And we're going to say IAM stack, and then I already forget what we called the output, this. Okay. There we go. So this is our log group, and then this is another really important thing about log groups. Log groups by default retain data indefinitely. Okay, they're never going to get rid of any of your data as it ages. So you would want to set it up to like rotate your logs after a certain period of time, because part of CloudWatch logs is you will pay for the storage that it uses. So it's kind of one of those sneaky costs that can just kind of add up over time, and eventually somebody will say, why is this costing us so much? So retain in days is how we're setting this, and our retain in days is set to 365, kind of a standard thing. There's all sorts of different options, but just to keep this small, that's what we did. And in this case, we don't need that anymore. We can make it IAM stack, and the rest of this is fine. And then down here, this is the actual flow log creation. And this is the permissions statement, or the role, sorry, that it will use to have permissions to write to CloudWatch logs. Here's our log group name. And what did we do here? We're referring to log group 0. Oh, yeah, this is the log group. And then we refer to the log group here. And then the resource that we want to associate the flow log with, this is our VPC. And then we're going to say capture all traffic for the entire VPC. Okay. So we can deploy this now. So let's go here. Actually, we got to do this, don't we? Grab this. Here's the VPC, so we'll just grab this. Source, i.e., I don't like this name that we used, but anyways, flow logs. And here we need the VPC stack. And we need the IAM stack. Is that, and IAM stack is this, right? So that should take care of our flow log for us. So let's commit this. And we'll push that up. Give that a second. You'll be serious. No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Again, like I've messed something up in this setup. It used to, I'm pretty sure it used to scroll, so I'm not sure why it isn't scrolling for me today. Don't know what I did wrong. The first thing we'll need to do is we need to update this stack. So since that one's done, let's go back over here. And remember, we added some new permissions to IAM. So here's the new policy and the new role. So we'll do that first, because we need that export value to become the import value in our actual flow log. And I'll just show you. So if while we're waiting, if we go to VPC, we go to here, and we go to flow logs. You can see we have no flow logs. So no flow logs by default. And flow logs can log to multiple different sources. You'll notice here, right? You can push it to CloudWatch logs, which we're doing. You can push it to S3, or you can push it to Firehose. So 3 different things, but you can only do one of those. If you wanted to do multiple destinations, then you would have to create multiple flow logs with a slight caveat. Firehose is a service that lets us take data from one source. In this example, let's say our VPC flow logs config, and it supports a number of destinations. So depending on what you're doing, you could write to Firehose and then configure your Firehose to write to multiple supported data destinations in AWS. Okay, but for today, we're just going to do CloudWatch logs. Okay, so that's good. And then if we go to flow logs, all this is going to do is create our log group and then create the flow log. Validation error. Oh, look, sorry, I'm not reading. It's asking us for an ARN, and I passed it a name. So that's not going to work. So we got to go back over here. And in IAM, we didn't even export the name, or sorry, the role. Wow, the ARN. So let's try this again. So we'll go here. We'll change this to ARN, and this is, if I remember, we'll look this up. I think it's just that, and we'll say role ARN, and we'll bring that one in. Okay, but let's check to see. So if we go back to Firefox and we look this up, and we just go to return values. Yeah, so we're just exporting the name right now, but we need the ARN. So that should fix that problem. And if we, before I deploy this, I'll just show you what I'm doing. I need to get rid of the stack that failed, right? So we'll just delete this. Okay. And we got to wait for that to actually be cleaned up. Otherwise, it will cause our stack deploy to fail. While we're waiting, let's go have a quick look at our to-do list here. Right. So we've got our security group deployed, we've got SSM deployed, and we're going to do a test next. I always find this funny. Like the thing that failed and was in the middle of the rollback process takes the longest to delete. I don't know why that happens like that. Is there anything else we can work on while we're waiting? Not really. We just need that flow log. The reason I want to show you the flow log is the way I'm thinking of testing this. Right now, if we ran a test, it would work perfectly fine because we have the internet gateway, so there's no way for us to tell which way it's going. Is it going out through the internet gateway, or is it using the route table, right? Is it going this way, or is it going this way? So what I thought we could do is, once this stack actually deletes, and we can try it again, we could get it deployed, the flow log deployed, and do a test. And then in the flow log, I'll show you how you can tell where it's actually going. Is it going this way, or is it going this way? I think in my head I know how to do this, so we'll check it out. Okay, the stack is finally deployed. So if we go back over here, there we go, right? And let me push that change from PyCharm. Exported name, not ARN. So we'll deploy that. And then back in Firefox, hopefully, we'll get it to work the second time here. While I'm waiting, I'm going to see if I can figure out what I've done wrong to my software here. Isn't that weird? Somewhere in here, I'm sure there's a way to reset the display, but I don't know what I've done, but I've messed it up somehow. So let's go back here. We got to do IAM again. So this change set will look empty because we're not actually changing anything. We're just adding a new output, but that's fine. So we'll do this. That should go pretty quick. Okay, and then if we go to outputs, there's our flow log role ARN now, and that's what we actually need. And then we've got role ARN, which did we actually, I don't think we changed, did we? If we go here, we go back to flow logs. Yeah, look at this, we did, it needs to be role ARN, right? Role ARN, yeah. Okay. So let this run again. I don't know why I did that. And the way, once we get the flow log deployed, the way I'm going to test this to make sure that it actually works is we're going to delete. So if we flip back over here, we're going to delete this. I won't delete it in CloudFormation. We could do that in CloudFormation. Do I want to? Let's try it in CloudFormation. See what's the worst that could happen, right? So we're going to delete this. So then that way our VPC is no longer connected to the internet. So we don't even have the ability to do this anymore. We're going to force it to go this way, right? That'll be the true test of it. Does it actually work? Okay, so our stack is done again. We shouldn't have a change set here for IAM anymore. Let's see if we can get flow logs to work. So here we go. Our log group. There we go. That's an easy one. Now, if we go back to the VPC, what we will have is in our VPC definition, if we go to flow logs, there it is. And now you can see that we're writing everything to CloudWatch logs, and that's our log group. So if we go look at the log group, not sure why it didn't select our log group for us. There it is. Okay. And if we set this up, there's our retention period. You'll notice that it doesn't have a KMS key ID. It doesn't have a KMS key ID because we're using the default one, right? The CloudWatch logs managed key. So it's not going to show you that here, but it is encrypted by default. And we don't have any log data here yet because the aggregation, I can't remember, oh, there we go. There's some lag, right? And then what we could do is we could go up to log insights and we could run a query against this. We'll just do this for now. Over the last hour is more than enough, and we should start seeing traffic, although maybe it's just going to take a little longer. Okay, but we'll start to see traffic in here for whatever's flowing in or out of our VPC. Okay, so that's that piece. So that's good. So let's do our test. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to EC2. We'll leave that window open because we're going to need that. We're going to go back to EC2. And here's our instance. And nothing will change here. This should work no problem. Okay. From our perspective, nothing changes. Okay, perfect. So that's fine. What we're going to do then is let's have a look and see if we change our template and remove the internet gateway in the VPC template, what's going to happen. And if I'm using the template that I think we're using, we could actually make this change quite easily. I just don't know what exactly it's going to try to delete. So if we go to VPC, in our standard template, this is the one that we use as part of our Orbit build service. Metadata doesn't matter. If we go down and we look, see this right here is public, and it defaults to yes. And then what happens is we use conditions to determine what to deploy. So here's an example. It only creates an internet gateway if is public is true. I think we should try this just to see what's going to happen. What I'm going to do is we're going to go back to our GitLab deployment, and I'm going to find VPC, and I'm going to say is public, and we're going to change that to no. Okay, and then in here, our parameter override will say is public equals is public, and this should actually deploy or delete a bunch of stuff. Okay, so let's deploy this. Is it a feature or a fix? It's a feature. Removing public access for testing. And we'll push that. All right, and then if we go back to Firefox. There's our VPC. Oh, while we're waiting, let's go back over here and run this script, this query again. There we go. So now we're starting to see traffic. So you can see that's our source. This is our destination. There's the source port. There's the destination. Here's the source. Here's our destination. Source port, destination port. The other really nice thing about VPC flow logs, great for troubleshooting. See this field over here? This is the action field. So what you're able to do if you're troubleshooting is you could do something like this. We could just leave that and then add a filter and say filter action equals reject and run that, and it'll show us only the rejected traffic. And rejected traffic from a VPC flow logs means one of two things. First, it's the traffic was rejected by a network access control list, a NACL, or it was rejected by a security group. So then you could work backwards from there. You know, if you've got rejected traffic that you wanted to flow through, it's a great way to say, all right, now I know that the traffic is flowing either into or out of the VPC, but it's a NACL or a security group that's stopping it. One of the reasons why we use this all the time. It's a great troubleshooting tool. The other nice thing about this is, let's say you do this. Another example, you could do something like, I won't run it, but you know the source address is 10.22.10.11.11, right? So somebody calls you up and says, well, I'm not getting traffic to this IP address or whatever. Let's just change this and say destination address. What you could do is you could run this query, and if you see no traffic in here, then you know the traffic isn't getting to the VPC or isn't leaving the VPC. In that case, you know you're dealing with a routing problem because you're not seeing the traffic here at all. We use this all the time. It's a great troubleshooting tool. Okay. So that's working, right? And we know we've got traffic flowing in and out of here now. No rejected traffic, which is fine. The other thing that you could do is, what if you don't know what this is? What is 1098.73.88? It's an IP address within our VPC. So here's another nice little troubleshooting tip. We're using the default VPC flow log setup, which has these fields. You can add a whole bunch of other fields, so you can probably get what I'm about to show you in easier ways in the flow log. I haven't seen it, so you'd have to look in the documentation, which I'll share you a link for in a second. But let's say this is what you've got. What you could do is you could take this IP address. You want to know what this is, right? Copy that, go back to your EC2 console, and down the left-hand sidebar, find network interfaces. These are all the elastic network interfaces in your account. And now I could search for that IP. There it is. And this, now I can look through this and I can find out what it is. In this case, it's our EC2 instance, right? So if I just click on this and say, open in a new tab, it's our Twitch instance, right? So that's how you can kind of work backwards from there. Perfect, so that's that piece. Oh yeah, we're going to blow up our VPC and see what happens. So if we go to our VPC, refresh this, here's our change set. Look what it's going to do. It's going to blow away a bunch of stuff. It's going to essentially, I don't know if this will actually work, but let's go through this. It's going to remove our internet gateway. It's going to remove our NAT gateways and the IPs associated with those NAT gateways, because we don't need those anymore. It's going to update our private route tables. It's actually going to remove them. Remove private routes. That's interesting. Okay, and then here it's got our public routes. Those are all gone. Our public subnet's gone, and our public route tables are gone. Okay. Oh, I just thought of something. If we do this, if we ran this right now, this would not work anymore. This piece right here wouldn't work anymore because we're going from a VPC to something outside of the VPC. And right now, the way that's working is you can imagine flow logs running in here. It's going like this. Okay. So we need an interface endpoint for this before we delete the internet gateway. So let's actually do that first. Oh, I was going to share with all of you the did I share the flow logs already? Logs. I didn't. I just shared. Yeah, I didn't. Okay, so let me find that for you. Here is the link to that doc. And if I just change my screen here, right, here's the default format. So this is what we have. Where is it? Right here. Okay. But you can see down here, these are all the fields that you could use. Some of these are included in the default format. This is the one that we were looking at. Action is accepted or rejected. But see here, you could add VPC IDs, subnet IDs, instance IDs. There's lots of other things you can add to this, but we just use the default one. Okay, so you might want to look at that if it makes sense for what you're trying to do. So what we need to do is we need to go back to our interface endpoints, and we're going to add a new CloudWatch interface endpoint. And let's see. Let me just pull up. Did I leave the docs open for that? I did, yeah. Okay. So here's what we're looking at now. So CloudWatch logs right here. It's just the one endpoint that we need. Okay. So we can go back here and it'll look exactly the same. So we'll just grab this and we'll call it CloudWatch log 0. Actually, I cut and paste the whole thing, didn't I? So we'll say CloudWatch logs 0. This can all stay the same, and here it's just logs. Okay, that's all we need to do. Okay, so we'll push that. So we'll deploy the VPC, or sorry, the interface endpoint for CloudWatch logs. We'll do that, and then we'll run that stack update on the VPC and see what it does. It might not be able to do it, and if that's the case, what we'll do is we'll just we'll blow some of the stuff up manually just to get rid of that internet gateway to do our test and see if everything still works. Did it deploy it? Where is it? No, it's still working on it. Okay, there it goes. There's our interface endpoints. There we go. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong thing. That's our VPC. This is what we want. So there, it's just adding the new endpoint. So we'll run that. And it's using the same security group, which means anything within the VPC can communicate with the CloudWatch logs service through our new interface endpoint that we've deployed. It's probably there already. If we go back over to VPC, close a couple of these down. Go endpoints. No, it's not. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's just coming to life. So we'll give it a little longer. There we go. All right, perfect. So now let's see what happens if we go here and we run this crazy change set. Okay. I don't know what this will do. If it works, it's basically going to delete in the subnets. We have public subnets and private subnets. It's going to delete all of the public subnets, the internet gateways, and then in the route tables, it'll change the private route tables so that it basically is only communicating within the VPC because it has no path to the internet anymore. So far, so good. Right, there goes our public subnet. There goes our NAC gateways. There goes our other subnet. Oh, it looks like it's going to work. I'm just hoping it doesn't completely blow up the resources that we want to keep. I guess we'll find out, right? Okay, there we go. Update complete. If we go back to the VPC console now, and we select VPCs, and we can just use the resource map here. Yeah, there we go, right? So we've got the private and protected subnets. The protected subnet is just what's in our standard template. We would use the protected subnets for things like databases. A lot of times we want to put a database in a subnet that would allow us to communicate only with other resources in the VPC, right? We don't want anything from outside to be able to communicate with that database, so put it in a protected subnet. And there's our private subnet. The only network connection that we have right now is the VPC endpoint to S3. It doesn't show interface endpoints in this screen. Okay. So what should happen is if we go back to EC2, let's just star that. All right. In theory, let's see what happens. There we go. We can still connect to this EC2 instance through SSM, but now SSM is communicating through the interface endpoint. Oh, in theory. Oops, look at that. It's not completely right. Oh, that's interesting. What did I miss? Oh, so close. Yeah, normally, before we got that prompt immediately, right? That's really interesting. What else could it be? Because if we looked at this, we've got SSM, EC2 messages, EC2, SSM messages. We don't need KMS in this case because we didn't use any custom KMS. It's not required, right? If you want to use encryption for session manager or parameter store. So we don't use that, either of those options. And we've got this, and we have our S3 gateway endpoint. So that to me looks right. What did we miss? The tricky part now is troubleshooting this piece. Go to log groups. We really shouldn't see anything here because, let's just get rid of this. You can see, kind of see what happened right here. There's no traffic, so something is wrong here. What is wrong? See this? See the difference? We've got actual IPs here, and then suddenly just drops to nothing. If we look at 5 minutes, yeah, right there is probably where we ran that stack update. So what did we do wrong? Okay, so let's go back here. Let's just go through this. This might just be the way that we've got our route tables set now. First off, the thing we should check is, yeah, no, we've got them in the private subnets. So there's our prefix list to go. It's a VPC endpoint. This is for S3, and then all we've got left is the local route, which means we can see everything in the VPC. So that's fine. And both the private subnets should be like that. I'm just going to check something. I'm like 95% sure. If we go EC2, what subnet did we deploy this in? Yeah, it's in the private subnet. That's fine. And then if we just double check our VPC endpoints, if we go here, subnets, these are in the private subnets, so that's fine. And then we can look at the ENIs for these. And we can look at, see here, this is the security group. So we can open the security group, and we're allowing TCP on 443 from anywhere in the VPC. So that's fine as well. I wonder if, you know, when all else fails, let's try this. We're going to do the old poke it in the eye thing. I'm almost wondering, like, did the agent, because the agent was communicating, and then we disconnected it essentially through removing all those endpoints, or removing the internet gateway and the routes and everything. I wonder if the agent just stopped communicating and wasn't able to restart, maybe? I don't know. Because to me it looks right. We've got the route tables, we've got our interface endpoints, we've got the appropriate security group as far as I can tell on there. So let's try a reboot and see what happens. Let's see, AWS, SSM, VPC. Well, this is the process that we followed, right? Step 1. This is the whole SSM setup. And this is what we did. Right, we did these 3, and then we actually did logs and S3. Okay. Okay, so that's stopped. Let's start it again. And while we're waiting for this, okay, here we go. Here's some troubleshooting stuff if we need it. Yeah, that's what we got. SSM, EC2 messages. Make sure that you've specified all VPC endpoints for SSM. Okay, well, let's see what happens here. Okay, this is running again. Darn, what have we missed? So it says we need an instance profile, which I know we have already. Just to double check that, there's our instance profile. If we go, okay, there's our instance. It's running. See that though? Connection lost. Does it give us any more info in here? That's not really show us anything. And I know trying it again is not going to work. Yeah, that's fine. There's really not much here. Inbound, that's fine, but outbound rules to anywhere. This is the interface endpoint security group, and it's allowing all traffic outbound, which is fine, and then inbound from the VPC. What are we missing? Oh. You know what? Remember I said this at the beginning? Let's try something. I wonder if we have to have that turned on. I can't remember in the configs. Let me find this again. Private DNS enabled. Let's go here. You know, it's funny. I remember this before. I think this actually has to be here. Okay, so we'll push that. And then while we're waiting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop that EC2 instance again. And I'm doing that just because at some point the agent, if it can't communicate with the SSM service, it will give up. It'll stop trying. So we'll just preemptively stop this. And that way, okay, that way, when we get our private DNS endpoints enabled on all those interface endpoints, we restart the agent, then that way we'll essentially, we're forcing that SSM agent to communicate, to reestablish that communication. I don't know if this is it, but it's the only thing I can think of. So if we go CloudFormation, let's get rid of all these. All right, so yeah, it's not replacing anything, it's just adding that additional setting. The one thing that I should just mention here is if you want to enable private DNS, your VPC has to be configured with a couple options. Yeah, it has to have something enabled. I'll show you. We'll just make sure this update happens first. I think this is going to be our problem. Fingers crossed. If you, while we're waiting, if you look at the documentation here, I'm just rereading the CloudFormation documentation. And if we go down to this, if you read this, right, indicate whether to associate a private hosted zone with a specified VPC. The private hosted zone contains a record set for the default public DNS name for the service for the region. For example, blah, 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 which resolves to the private IP address of the endpoint network interface in the VPC. This enables you to make requests to the default public DNS service or public DNS name for the service instead of the public DNS names that are automatically generated by the VPC endpoint service. So if I'm reading that correctly, what I'm thinking is happening is SSM, the agent's coming to life and it's trying to resolve public DNS names for the SSM service, which it can't do anymore, right? Because there is no route to the public internet to do that name resolution. And if I'm reading this correctly, what this will do is it'll add a private hosted zone to our VPC, which would then allow us to look up the private IPs associated with our VPC interface endpoints. If you're trying to get to SSM, don't use this public IP, use this private IP. I think that's what we missed. And you'll notice here, if you want to use private DNS, then you need to have your VPC attributes set to true for enabled DNS host names and enabled DNS support. And we did that already. If we go back and we look, if we go here and we go to our VPC template and we just look at it this way, see right here, we just turn that on by default. So that's there already. Okay. And this is still updating? Oh, there we go. All right, so let's see if my theory is correct. We'll go back here and let's restart this. We'll give it a minute to come to life. It always takes longer while you're sitting waiting for it. I'll push my luck. Click connect. There we go. Yoo-hoo. Now we say connect. And there we go. Perfect. And you see we don't have any connectivity to the outside world anymore. But because we have that gateway endpoint, and if you think back to this diagram, we've now verified that this is working, right? We're going through the interface endpoint to SSM because we're connecting to the machine on SSM. Let's see this. This should work because we tested it last week. And what we should be able to do here is if we go and we look at our S3 bucket, oh, wrong place. Let's go back here. If we go back to our S3 bucket, I redeployed it, and it is which one? This one. Shouldn't have anything in it because I cleaned it up from last week. So if we grab this, and we go back to Systems Manager, and we'll test this the same way that we did last week. So we'll just say vi test.txt. Okay, so we'll just create ourselves a little text file, and then we'll say AWS S3 CP test to S3 like that. Upload failed. Oh, access denied. Now there's another slightly confusing outcome. Oh, I know why. Do you remember when we did our no, that's incorrect. I was like, oh, that's an easy one. When we go here and we look at this gateway endpoint, route tables, our two private route tables are set up for that, right? I wonder if it's the bucket policy, because remember we set that bucket policy up on this? I can't remember what we did. So we're going to deny puts and deletes on this resource if it's not coming from this VPC endpoint. But put, delete, deny these actions if it's not coming from this endpoint. I wonder, remember we did something weird last week to show the difference between gets and puts? I'm going to edit this manually for a second. Whoops. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go here and we're going to say S3 get object. No, we ran a put, didn't we? So no, that's not the problem, because that puts. So the other thing would be, let's cancel this. On our EC2 instance, we have the role. Let's see the role settings here. It has, oh, look. Is that the right bucket name? That's got to be the right bucket name. Nope, it isn't. See that? Remember, we hard-coded this last week because I took a cheat. If you remember, last week what I did was I hard-coded it because of the way we were deploying the templates. And what we've done now is, if I'm reading this correctly, if we go grab this, we go back to PyCharm. I'm going to cause problems for us in the future, but let's just see if this is the problem first. If we go to IAM, Yeah, look. Okay, so let's do this first. And just make sure that I'm on the right path. I think this is what it is. And then what we'll do is we'll change this so that it's pulling the ARN values from the S3 bucket. Okay. So let's save that. Now, you know what? If I hadn't gotten lucky there, how could we have figured that out? The tricky part with this, like my first idea would be CloudTrail, but CloudTrail won't show us what we're after here because what was happening there is what's called a data event. We're trying to perform an operation on an object within the bucket, right? And by default, CloudTrail won't log those. It will log sort of control plane operations. Excuse me. So if we're performing operations on the bucket itself, we're changing the bucket configuration or something like that, right? It would show that, but it wouldn't by default show any operations on the objects themselves. There is a way to change this. I'll show you. We won't make the change here. I'll show you how you could do it if you wanted to enable that in your account. The thing to remember about enabling that is what we're looking at right here are what they call management events. The first copy of your management events in CloudTrail is free of charge. If you have multiple copies of management events, then any other management event copy would cost some additional money. But data events will increase the overall cost of your CloudTrail deployment. They are good to have, but you would want to make sure, like I say over and over in this thread, that you understand the pricing models before you turn some of these things on. You don't want to get a surprise bill, right? So I'll leave this window open because I'll come back and show you that. But if we go to CloudFormation, we go back to IAM, we should have a change set here. And that's just going to modify our policy. So we'll execute that. And this is a little bit of a weird way to do this anyways, because a lot of times what we might have is we would have all the templates for the infrastructure pieces, and then I might actually separate some of the things that we're doing here into like an application stack, maybe with the serverless framework or something like that. So then we could pull the S3 bucket names that we need into that serverless framework as it's deploying the stack for us. So I'm kind of doing it a little oddly here just to demonstrate this. So that works. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so that's fine. And then if we do AWS S3 RM, we should be able to do S3. I'll copy this. Again, I don't know. Hold on. I don't know if I gave myself delete on. I did. There we go. So now it's working. And that's all, again, going through the gateway endpoint. So before I show you the CloudTrail stuff, right? So I'd say at this point, that's done as well. So we've got, let's go like this. A green check mark. We've done everything that we set out to do now. So we've got our VPC with both gateway endpoints and interface endpoints deployed, and we're demonstrating interface endpoints to SSM, and I guess in theory, I'm definitely running out of room here. We have another interface endpoint that's allowing, actually I should draw it this way. Really, if you think about it this way, it's the VPC service going like that, right? Right? Because we're using that interface endpoint to talk to flow logs. Let's check flow logs actually before I give ourselves the green check mark. And then remember, this has a security group, but in our example here, it's the same security group. Okay. Diagram's getting a little full at this point. So let's go back over here. go back to Firefox, and if we go CloudWatch and find, well, we'll do it this way. Go to Insights. And grab this one? What? I don't know what I called it. I don't think that's it. Let's go back this way. Log groups. Oh, oh, look, it changed my region. I don't know why it does that. Yeah, that's what we're after here, right? So if we look at that in flow logs, or sorry, not flow logs, CloudWatch log insights, and we'll do the same thing. Just strip some of this down so we get something easier to read. So now we've got traffic back. Not a lot, again, because it's really just when we were doing that session manager piece, and then you've probably got some log traffic here. What is, if we go and we look at our EC2 instance again? So just to show you, remember I was showing you those kind of ways that we could set these up, the queries. So I could go like this, go back over here and say filter source address equals that. And now we're just seeing anything that's originating from our EC2 instance. And if you wanted to know what these were again, like I showed you before, you could just grab this and head back to the EC2 console and go under network interfaces. Put that IP in. And you can see in this case, this is right here, VPC endpoint. So it's a particular endpoint. And if I had have named this a little better, we could get this info right from here. But because I don't have a name or a tag value, I could take that and head back to our VPC endpoints view and search for it. And that is EC2 messages, if you remember, is part of SSM. So now, in that case, we're seeing our EC2 instance talk to the EC2 messages component of the SSM service. Okay. Oh, and look, this is probably, see right there? That's probably the piece that we were missing before. We would only have, originally, we would have only had these public DNS names, which we could no longer resolve once the internet gateway wasn't there. So that's why we needed to make that change, and it created these private DNS names for us. Okay. So I think, folks, I want to say that's mission accomplished on what we've created, or what we set out to create, right? The interface endpoints, both, sorry, I keep saying interface endpoints, the VPC endpoints, both the gateway versions and the interface endpoint versions. I think what we'll do is we will call it here for this week, and we'll come back next week with a new set of projects. We'll see you then. Bye for now.